Hi, class. Welcome to week 4 of Human Rights Policing. This week, we read chapter 3, Police, Power, Agency, and Human Rights. The sections in there, Quis custodiet ipsos custores, which is who watches the watchman or who guards the guardsman. Next section, defining power and from where does power derive. Then we have a section on human agency versus determinism and the power of human agency. Next section, human agency and policing. And we'll have a story from inside the NOPD, the New Orleans Police Department, from my father. And then an excerpt that I wrote, threats to human rights, policing, moral panics, and manufacturing of folk devils. And one example that I give towards the end of that chapter is this episode from Black Mirror, Men Against Fire. So I'm going to talk about all that in just a little bit, at least briefly. Next week, week 5, reading assignments will be chapter 4. Chapter 4 is called The Sociological Imagination and Human Rights Policing. And so the sections there, an invitation to the sociological imagination, using the sociological imagination. Then you'll be introduced to a concept called verstehen, or understanding the actor's point of view. Another section, the stories we tell, the relationship between storytelling and human rights, storytelling and the double consciousness, which will be very important. I'll discuss all of this next week. And 30 Years of Policing, a Foreign Community, and that's an excerpt from my father. And so I will take you through some of the readings in just a little bit, but first, and I'm going along the PowerPoint. As you well know, I supply a PowerPoint to my weekly introduction lectures, and so hopefully they're they're useful to you. That's why I designed these PowerPoints. And so, again, I'll talk a little bit about the chapters the sections of the chapter you're going to read in a little bit. But first, you have for your community engagement projects on human rights policing. You want to start thinking about what types of questions and themes you want to develop for your community organization and or people. And so, for example, what are the organizations or the people that you're interested in? What are their concerns regarding policing? How do those community members want to be policed? One of the arguments that I'm going to make in a later chapter is that the police are not supposed to tell the community how they're going to be policed. That's not what happens in a democracy. In a democracy, the community tells the police how they want to be policed. So it's the community-driven policing directed by the community. And right now we have the opposite model in the United States, and that's something that we want to transform in our society, where we have communities telling the police how they want to be policed. And so that could be an important theme to discuss with your community members or community organizations. How do they think they should, how do they want to be policed? What are their expectations with policing? So again, some themes, questions that you can ask, what are their concerns regarding policing in their community? What are they skeptical about police? What do community members of the community organization, not only do they expect, but what do they want from police as well? How can police be a valuable resource in the community? How do they believe also, can we improve policing? In other words, get their perspective on what's wrong with policing, what have been their personal experiences with policing, and what can be improved with policing from the perspective of the community organization that you're conducting this in community-engaged research in this class. So again, what can police do better in the community, and what resources can support the community? So not just what resources can police provide, but you also want to get an idea of what kind of resources does the community organization that you're focusing on for this project, what resources do they need that can support that community organization or the members of the community that they represent? So you want to start really thinking about that now. I also offered an interview guideline. Let me see if I found it. Yeah, it's in the first module of Canvas, and it says Human Rights Policing Interview Guidelines. It has an interview schedule, so you would in that interview schedule talk about the community organization, the name, date, time, duration, the location, so on. And then part one, that's part one. Part two, the 3 to 4 major themes that you develop. So you have theme one, and then um, it could be community, and I give an example of a theme, community experiences with police. And then you have a few sample questions from within that relate to that theme. What have been the community's experiences with police? Theme two, an example that I have is, what are the community concerns regarding policing? And then 2 to 5 questions about their concerns regarding policing, especially as it represents that community organization, or the people that community organization represents. And so you want to have some sample questions in there. Again, remember that it's important to ask probing questions, to ask questions that elicit stories. But when people give answers, you say, can you give me an example of that? Or can you give me a story that provides an example of that? Okay, so remember to do that for each of these questions within the themes. Theme three, another example I gave, human rights and policing, how to improve policing in the community. So how would they go about improving policing in the community? How could police do a better job for the community organization in question, or those community members? In other words, you want to get their perspective on how policing can be improved, again, from their perspective and from their experiences. Theme four, you can develop anything you want. These are just examples that I provided. Resources for community support, human rights. So in other words, what resources does that community organization need in order for them to be successful or prosperous, or for them to help out members of the community and be successful and prosperous? And what role can police play in that, and advocating and supporting the human rights of community members and the community organization? So that's part two. So again, start thinking about developing themes, and within each of those themes, you'll have sample questions that you're going to ask to the community organization or community members. In part three, you want to have final comments from the interviewee. Say, hey, is there anything else that you would like to say, or anything else you would like to state? Any other final comments? Then you would also ask them, do you have any questions for me? Anything that you would like to know? And then you want to write your initial reflections of the interview, and that's very important. So right when you're done with the interview or talking with people, the community organization, you want to go to a library or home or wherever you go, and you want to write down your initial reflections, key words, phrases they say, ideas that are emerging, new themes that maybe you should explore. In other words, write a reflection of your experiences. And then I also have critical reflections in that interview guideline. Following the interview, you should write down a reflective piece on the interview, including your thoughts prior to and after the interview. What did you learn? What mistakes did you make? What went well? What questions worked best? Did you ask questions that elicited stories? How will this interview inform your next interview? Did you cover your major themes during the interview? Are your themes changing, or should they stay the same? How did this interview inform your major research question under investigation? Things like that. So you want to write down a critical reflection. These are not things that I'm going to check that you did, maybe a little bit in the midterm progress report. These are basically for you to collect data and develop these themes. So later you'll be able to write your final paper where you discuss your research, your research question, your research findings, and then you issue a policy analysis or a policy proposal based on the perspective of your community organization or members on how we can move better towards human rights policing, as it relates specifically to the community organization that you have focused on in this class. And so there you go. So again, that interview guideline is already posted for you. It was posted in the first module of in Canvas, the first module. So take a check that out. It's called Human Rights Policing Interview Guidelines. And again, it's just guidelines. It's what I use whenever I interview people or talk to people. So I decided I'll write down this model to help students who will do something similar when talking to people in the community. Okay, so just a few things then to go over in the book, and I'm just looking here, chapter 3, Quies custodia ipsos custodes, of course, who watches it. In other words, who will police the police, right? And that's always been a question throughout all of society. And I even have some quotes there of from George Orwell. We know that no one ever seizes power with the intention of relinquishing it, and how true that is. And when you feel the desire for power, you should stay in solitude for some time. And so keep in mind that we live in a hierarchically arranged society where power exists everywhere, and power is embedded within all of our institutions. That's how hierarchy works, whether it's the Catholic Church, the military, the government, or even the university. There is a hierarchy of people, oftentimes with silly titles, who sit at the apex of power. And then the further down you go within that hierarchy, the less power one has. And oftentimes when people hold slightly more power than someone below them within this institutional hierarchy, they use this power to dominate and subjugate people and to control them. And so power, of course, is a very dangerous thing. It leads to bullying, domination, subjugation. And it's been a part of human society for a very long time. However, probably never more pronounced than in our advanced post-industrial neoliberal capitalist society. And so I explained the nature of power and who will watch the Watchmen, and I take you through a little bit of a history of that was based on some of my research. And then I've given some examples of what happens when people stand up to power. Look at people like Julian Assange, who exposed a lot of the war crimes that the United States government has committed, and published those war crimes. And of course, instead of the people that committed those war crimes being investigated, or the military being investigated, who do you think was attacked? The person that exposed the truth, the person that exposed the crimes of the powerful. So when you expose crimes that powerful people commit, then you will become subject to scrutiny, perhaps imprisonment, or getting assassinated, which has happened throughout numerous times throughout our history. Or you can look at people like Snowden, who exposed the illegal spy and the government's illegal spy and surveillance program against American citizens. And of course, Snowden has paid the price for that. If you don't know the story of Julian Assange and Edward Snowden, I fully recommend that you do so, but I definitely talk about it in the chapter there. So check it out. Very, very important there. Then in that next section, I talk about defining power, and I even go back to the ideas of Max Weber, the famous classical sociologist, who answers the question, where does power derive? And of course, in our modern society, power doesn't derive from, one's connection to the divine like it did in pre-modern types of societies based on traditional types of authority and domination. Rather, our power derives from our attachment to an institution. And so, for example, any American president, whether it's Obama or Biden or Trump, they're ultimately powerless in and of themselves as people. As people, they're nobodies. They're no better or worse or smarter or stupider than the average person. Yet they have an immense amount of power, not because of their personal attributes, but simply because of their attachment to a powerful institution, in this case, the nation state or the government, right? And so people get their power not from their personal abilities, at least in modern society, or their charisma, or their intelligence, or their talent, or any other personal attributes or characteristics they may or may not have. Rather, their power derives from their attachment to an institution. A Catholic priest, for example, has the ability to administer salvation, not because of their personal charismatic attributes, but because of their attachment to the Catholic Church, which as an institution has a power to administer salvation. And so the priest, through that institution, holds that power. I, as an individual, have no power to disperse grades to you, But because of my attachment to an institution that has granted me tenure and calls me a professor and recognizes my doctorate, my PhD, because of that, I have the power through my institution to administer things like grades and things like that. So same thing with police. Police don't have power because of their personal attributes or characteristics or anything like that. Their power derives from an institution known as law enforcement, and that's the only thing that gives them power and legitimacy. And of course, by the same token, when people lose trust in an institution, like many members of our society today has lost trust in the institution of law enforcement by default, then people that are part of that institution are also distrusted. And so an argument that I make is that if police officers want to be trusted, then they have to find a way for the community, the public, to regain trust in the institution of law enforcement. If the public regains trust in the institution of law enforcement, then by default, people have more trust in individual police officers. So police officers shouldn't take it personally when people don't trust them, is that people have lost trust in the institution, which gives them their power and thereby their trust. And in order to fix the problem, police have to find ways to convince people that law enforcement as an institution in our society is a trustable institution. The damage of the institution needs to be repaired in order for people to trust individual police officers. So fair or not for me to say, that's just the case. Okay, and so that's what I talk about in that section there. And I think it's pretty good. So I even talk about where power derives. That's where I go into Weber. And so I think you'll like that. Then we talk about human agency versus determinism. And of course, human agency is the ability to go against the grain of our own instincts, of our own biology, of our own innate unruly forces that shape and nearly determine our behavior. And agency is also the ability to go against the great structural forces, the external structural forces pushing and shaping our behavior in very powerful ways. And so agency is our ability to push back against the grain, to be extraordinary, to defy all odds, to go against all structural expectations, to become something else rather than what culture and structure has determined us, to spread our wings, to reveal our essence, to emerge as unique individuals and do something new and creative and sui generis, something original into ourselves. And so my argument is that when we're able to use our agency, we can excel and prosper and transcend the ordinary. We can go beyond the limitations of our jobs and our roles and our scripts and become something else. And one of the arguments that I make is that if police want to really protect the human rights of people, that they have to use their agency. They have to go beyond the ordinary. They have to go beyond the roles and scripts of being a police officer. They have to go beyond the roles and scripts of law enforcement. And they have to spread their wings in a new way. They have to perform a new role, a new script, one that protects human rights. They have to use their agency. So in other words, they have to use their potentials, their essence as human beings, and allow that unique potential and essence to emerge in order to do it differently, to do something new. And when we use our agency, we can change the world. We can transform our institutions, like, for example, converting or transforming policing from a social control institution into a human rights organization that protects truly the human rights of the American people, particularly the vulnerable among us. And so it's a very powerful section there on agency and human rights. And I believe I do a pretty decent job of laying it out there. But I didn't want to stop there. My father was very impressed with this idea of human agency and how it can be applied to being a police officer. So as a result, my father wrote a section called Human Agency and Policing, a story from inside the NOPD, the New Orleans Police Department. And I think you'll like that story. It's from real experiences of real police officers. But I didn't stop there. I started talking to police officers here in Wisconsin. And so police officer David Pell of the University of Wisconsin-La Crosse Police Department also offered a time where he used his sense of agency. And so I think you'll like that little excerpt there. Then I talk about threats to human rights policing, the creation of moral panics, and the manufacturing of folk devils. And so moral panics are usually when the media and politicians collude together, as well as moral entrepreneurs who see sin or something wrong going on in society, and they cause a big stink. And usually they find a scapegoat to blame for social problems, whether it's immigrants or inner city youths or any other type of group, any type of external threat, that the media does a good job in saying we have a social problem, and then they scapegoat a group of people for that social problem, and then they spend months or weeks or even years demonizing and dehumanizing those others, like urban Black kids or Hispanic, Latinx immigrants coming across the border, or Middle Eastern people, Muslims, or each immigrant group that's ever come into the United States, from the Irish to the Hungarians, to the Italians, to the Germans, how each of those groups have been scapegoated and dehumanized. And of course, that justified human rights abuses against those people. As a matter of fact, every time the United States goes and bombs some country abroad, they usually spend years demonizing those people, making them seem unhuman. And whenever people are dehumanized, then you can murder them, you can torture them, you can beat them, you can assassinate them in public view, you can deport them, you can lock them in cages, and you can take away or violate their human rights. And just about every time power has violated the human rights of people, first, they went through a whole propaganda campaign, usually done again with politicians and media and moral entrepreneurs, to scapegoat people, strip them of their humanity, dehumanize them completely, and then the violence and torture begins. And of course, this is a big threat to human rights policing, because we have always created an other, something to fear. We've manufactured a devil and then scapegoated that devil, and that justified all of our abuses against those people. And I give an example from a British show. I don't really watch much TV, but I really like this one, Black Mirror. Check it out if you get a chance. But I discussed this show from Black Mirror called, let me see what it was called. Man Against Fire. That was the name of the episode. And I give a brief summary of that there. And so your discussion board is very much related to that. So check out that discussion board. And it talks about, I ask you about folk devils, moral panics, and relating it to policing, relating it to human rights, etc. So I think you'll really like that discussion board. All the discussion boards that I make, I try to make it creative and thoughtful and hopefully enjoyable for you. That's it. So you know what's expected of you this week. You know what's expected of you next week. At some point, a little bit later in the semester, I'm going to offer an extended office hours for anybody who wants to meet with me. Remember, if you want to meet with me, of course, send me an email first, of course, to schedule a mutually convenient time. But I am going to offer pretty much a whole day at some point in this semester where you can meet with me if you'd like. It can't be mandatory because this is a fully online class, but I will offer it to you where you can meet with me and just get to know me a little bit, tell me a little bit about your project, or offer, get any guidance that you would like from me. So all that guidance is already on Canvas, and I try talking about it now. But of course, any extra feedback that you would like, I'm always available, and I will make sure that I have extended office hours in case you would decide to use it. Anyway, y'all are doing a great job. Keep up the outstanding work. Appreciate it very much, and keep on going strong. Thank you very much.